Earth's atmosphere on Saturday. After waving off the undocking of Dragon because of weather conditions off the coast of California, a final weather briefing was conducted this morning by NASA and SpaceX managers. The weather conditions were carefully evaluated and determined that winds at the Splashdown site off the coast of California are and will be within limits tomorrow morning.
SpaceX Dragon on Big Loop for LIO.
Go ahead, Dragon. We're with you on the Big Loop.
Hey, LIO cartridge number 4 has been installed in active slot at GMT 1955.
We copy. LIO cartridge 4 installed in active slot at 1955.
And once again, Takuya Onishi confirming with SpaceX flight controllers in Hawthorne that the air scrubbing canisters have been installed aboard Dragon to help with the scrubbing out of carbon dioxide during Endurance's free flight away from the station through the time of entry and splashdown on Saturday morning. The countdown clocks here in Mission Control are counting towards the command that will be issued 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 30 seconds from now for the retraction of an umbilical that is basically a power and telemetry cable that has provided power to Endurance during its 5 months attached to the forward port of the International Space Station. Once that umbilical retracts, the command that will previously be issued begins the opening of 2 sets of hooks, 6 hooks for each set, that have held Endurance firmly in place to the forward port on pressurized mating adapter number 2 on the forward end of the Harmony module. Once those hooks are opened later today, there will be the first of 2 undocking burns, as they are called, the first for 1.5 seconds to begin the physical separation of Endurance from the International Space Station. The second burn of 5 seconds in duration will accelerate that opening rate and lead to the beginning of 4 so-called departure burns, which will increase the phasing away from the station for Endurance to a safe distance for the deorbit burn that is scheduled for Saturday morning. Earlier this week, the departing Crew-10 crew members, led by Commander Ann McClain, had a few moments to share their thoughts with the Expedition 73 crew members that they were part of and continue to be part of until they undock later this afternoon. That all led into a change of command ceremony in which Takuya Onishi of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency handed over station command to Sergei Ryzhikov of Roscosmos. McClain's comments were particularly poignant. Let's take a moment as we replay her comments this past Tuesday as the Crew-10 began preparations to begin their trip home.
And as we complete our mission on Space Station, we really want to lead with gratitude for the absolute privilege of getting to live and work aboard this amazing International Space Station. All of us are keenly aware that we may never get to do this again, and we've been very pensive over the last days of understanding what we have all got to be a part of. And we know that there's some tumultuous times on Earth, and there's some people that are going through struggles all around. And we want this mission, our mission, to be a reminder of what people can do when we work together, when we explore together. The foundations of this mission were laid long before any of us got here. This is a short snapshot in time today in our mission. But the International Space Station, this international mission that has been going on for almost 25 years, was made possible by visionaries who years before believed in something this massive. I truly believe that this is one of the biggest feats of cooperation that humans have ever accomplished. It takes people from every country all around the world every single day showing up to support this mission to make it happen. And really, we just get to be, we had the privilege of getting to be here for a short period of that time. But if we think back to 40 years ago when this idea was conceived and the international partnerships started to come together, the atmosphere and the climate politically was very similar to what it is now. There's a lot of people that would say that's not going to be possible. But all it took was visionaries from all around the world to work together, to have a mustard seed of faith that something like this could be done when we work together. Crew-10 has had the absolute privilege of working here for the last 4 months, and we have so much gratitude for all of the ground teams that showed up every day to make this possible. We truly are very humbled to represent humanity, and we hope that we can be a reminder to others of the goodness of humanity and what we really can accomplish when we work together.
Once again, those words from Dragon Commander Anne McClain of NASA this past Tuesday during farewell remarks at the beginning of a change of command ceremony. So as we fast forward now, the 4 crew members who are departing the station, McClain, Nichole, Ayers, Takuya, Onishi, and Kirill Peskov, are aboard Dragon, preparing to configure the systems on their spacecraft before they close the hatch and begin suiting up into their launch and entry suits. Once the hatch is closed, there will be leak checks on both sides of the docking interface that you see there from external camera views on the station. Those leak checks will ensure that we have an airtight seal before we begin to depressurize the small passageway or vestibule that connects Dragon to the forward port of the Harmony module through that pressurized mating adapter on the right side of your screen. Once the vestibule is depressurized and the pressure is equalized on both sides of the docking interface, that will set the stage for the undocking command to be issued by SpaceX flight controllers in Hawthorne, California. That's scheduled 1 hour 57 minutes from now, 5 minutes after that command is issued, and with all 12 hooks holding Endurance to the International Space Station opened. The first undocking burn of about 1.5 seconds in duration will be issued, and that basically breaks the interface between Endurance and the station and marks the official undocking of the vehicle from the orbital outpost. The International Space Station is currently traveling in an orbit 262 miles above the Earth, moving from northwest to southeast across the Atlantic Ocean east of the continent of South America, about to enter an orbital sunset. The station, of course, orbits every 90 minutes at an inclination of 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. We now have received confirmation that the hatch on Endurance is closed, so we'll mark that at 3:04 p.m. Central Time, 4:04 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, the hatch closed to the Dragon Endurance.
SpaceX Dragon and PPRV ISO valve confirmed visually open.
SpaceX copies on the big loop.
And this view inside the Dragon Endurance with the hatch to the International Space Station's Harmony module having been closed through pressurized mating adapter number 2. You're looking at crew members who are configuring systems prior to completion of their suit-up procedures that will lead to their undocking at 5:05 p.m. Central Time, 6:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, this is a 17.5-hour transit away from the station to a splashdown site off the coast of California on Saturday morning. The deorbit burn on Saturday morning at 9:39 a.m. Central Time, 10:39 a.m. Eastern Time will be a 17.5-minute retrograde firing to slow Endurance down by 115 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit for its high-speed entry back into the Earth's atmosphere. About 18 minutes after the deorbit burn, there will be the claw separation that basically holds the trunk in place, followed by the trunk of Dragon, the lower portion of Dragon. That will separate at 9:58 a.m. Central Time, 10:58 a.m. Eastern Time, before Endurance is maneuvered into the proper orientation for entry with the heat shield facing in the direction of travel to ablate or repel heat that will build up around the spacecraft to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. There will be a brief period of loss of signal because of the ionization of molecules around the spacecraft itself. Once we come AOS, or the acquisition of signal following that period of ionization, we'll be set for the deployment of the drogue chutes on Endurance, followed a short time later by the main chute deployment. Splashdown is scheduled at 10:33 and 47 seconds a.m. Central Time, 11:33 and 47 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. That will be 8:33 a.m. off the coast of California. Again, splashdown scheduled on Saturday morning.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Control of cabin air temperature via 4.080 is allowed until pre-chill. Note that the hex is currently configured for maximum cooling.
Phase 4.080.
And the view inside Dragon, you're looking at the crew members who are completing their suit-up procedures. On the very right side of your screen is Takuya, Onishi, and Kirill Peskov, already in their seats, Nichole, Ayers, and the Dragon commander, and McClain. The undocking and departure profile off the forward port of the International Space Station's Harmony module will carry Dragon to a distance of about 400 meters in front of the station, and then a similar distance above the station and behind the station as the departure burns carry Dragon into a trajectory that will result in it phasing away from the International Space Station over the course of about 17 hours prior to the deorbit burn that will ultimately bring Endurance home. Once again, the mission will wrap up tomorrow morning, with Crew-10 having spent 148 days in space, 146 of them aboard the station, a journey of 2,368 orbits spanning 62.7 million miles. During their mission, the 4 crew members of Crew-10 conducted a multitude of scientific experiments, and McClain and Nichole Ayers conducted 1 spacewalk totaling 5 hours and 44 minutes in duration. This will be the 4th time that a Dragon will have splashed down off the coast of California. The FRAM-2 mission, the commercial resupply uncrewed CRS-32 mission, and most recently the Axiom-4 mission, all concluded with splashdowns off the coast of California, but this will be the first time that a Dragon involved in the commercial crew program will have returned to Earth with a splashdown off the coast of California. And in the near field of view, Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov completing his suit up and his strap in to his seat. If you're just joining us, the hatch to the Dragon Endurance, that is the vehicle bringing home the Crew-10 quartet, was closed at 3:04 p.m. Central Time, 4:04 p.m. Eastern Time. You're seeing the crew members completing their suit-up procedures. There will be leak checks on both sides of the docking interface between Endurance and the forward port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station through pressurized mating adapter number 2. Once those leak checks are complete, the small passageway at the docking interface will be depressurized to vacuum. That will set the stage for the undocking command to be issued 1 hour and 46 minutes from now. That will come right on the dot at 5 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, initiating a 5-minute procedure to retract the umbilical between Dragon and the International Space Station, that umbilical having provided power and telemetry to Dragon during the course of its almost 5 months of docked operations. 2 sets of hooks, 6 hooks per set, will then be opened. Set 1 first, followed about 2 minutes later by set 2. And then the first of the undocking burns, a quick burst of the Draco thrusters on Dragon for about a second and a half, will be initiated at 5:05 p.m. Central Time, 6:05 p.m. Eastern Time. to initiate the actual physical separation of Dragon from the International Space Station. While we have a handover in our downlink video from the station through our tracking and data relay satellite system, you're looking at Flight Director Allison Bollinger on the right side of your screen, joined to her right by spacecraft communicator Tess Caswell, who has been talking to both the departing Dragon crew and the Expedition 73 crew, who remain on board the complex. For Sergei Ryzhikov, Johnny Kim, and Alexei Zabritsky, who launched aboard Soyuz back in September, the Soyuz MS-27 spacecraft, this is their 123rd day in space, to the Harmony module that will be closed a short time from now, initiating the beginning of the equalization of pressure and the ultimate depressurization of that vestibule, very short passageway between Dragon and the International Space Station.
Dragon Houston on 2.
Houston Dragon, go ahead.
Stand by for Big Loop RF audio config. And we expect this to cause approximately a 2-minute dropout in audio with MCC.
See a 2-minute dropout, and for everyone's awareness, we are starting section 5 of 4.010. All 4 crew members are seated, and strapped in.
That conversation referencing the Big Loop, that is the interconnected communications channel that ties the space-to-ground loop aboard the International Space Station with the communication system aboard Dragon, and which will remain in play until Dragon departs the so-called approach ellipsoid, which is basically a racetrack boundary outside of which the integrated operations between Mission Control here in Houston and the SpaceX Mission Control Center in Hawthorne, California is conducted. Once Dragon departs the approach ellipsoid, the work is essentially done for Mission Control here in Houston for the joint phase of this mission, and SpaceX Mission Control will take over full operations of Dragon's departure, its back away and phasing away from the International Space Station all the way through Splashdown on Saturday morning off the coast of California. The space station is currently flying 262 miles south of the continent of Africa, about to begin a southwest to northeasterly trek that will carry it across the east coast of Australia and back across the North Pacific And as you can see on the left side of your screen, the hatch is now closed on the station side of the docking interface. As Zena Cardman cleans up some of the equipment prior to the start of the leak checks that will be conducted between Dragon and the International Space Station to ensure that we have a tight seal before the depressurization of the passageway that will be the precursor to the undocking of Endurance from the station, physical separation scheduled at 5:05 p.m. Central, 6:05 p.m. Eastern Time. The communications loops have now been properly configured according to flight controllers here in Houston.
Dragon on the big loop. Houston Dragon, we have you loud and clear.
All right. C2V2 RF config is complete on the big loop, so you were just about to call SpaceX. We'll let that be your comm check.
And Dragon, SpaceX has you loud.
SpaceX test, thanks Cronus. SpaceX Dragon, we are complete with...
Okay, SpaceX has you loud and clear on the big loop.
Complete with suit donning. We are at 4.011, looking for your go on 1.1.
Dragon, your go to begin suit leak check procedure 4.011.
And McClain talking to both the Capcom here in Houston and the Core, or SpaceX Capcom in Hawthorne, California, if you will. The procedures that they're relaying back and forth now have reached the point of leak checks on their suits to ensure that they have a tight seal on all 4 suits for the departing crew members.
Standing by for your go to close the 8-pass hatch.
And Johnny, before we give you that go, we'd like to confirm that you saw no damage or debris in your inspection in 5.2.
Confirm, no damage or debris, clean seals on in step 5.2.
You are go for step 5.3.
Work.
NASA's Johnny Kim talking to Tess Caswell, the Capcom here in Houston, as they are about to complete the series of hatch closure procedures, this being the final hatch between the pressurized mating adapter and Harmony itself, that will set the stage for not only the suit leak checks for the 4 Dragon Endurance crew members, but also set the stage for the depressurization of the vestibule connecting Dragon to the International Space Station. We want that vestibule to be depressurized down to vacuum with readings that are equivalent on both sides of the docking interface before we move into the undocking command later this afternoon that will set in motion the physical separation of Endurance from the complex and begin the journey home for the 4 crew members comprising Crew-10 and McClain, Nichole, Ayers, Takuya, Onishi, and Kirill, Peskov.
SpaceX Dragon on the big loop, at 2.2, ready to pressurize.
Dragon, you are go to initiate suit leak check.
Copy, goes.
And McClain, the Endurance commander, indicating that the crew is about to pressurize their suits to ensure that we have tight seals and good integrity on the 4 suits for the departing crew members.
Houston copies.
Leak checks underway for the 4 suits. About 1 minute left before we should hear from SpaceX that we have 4 good suits.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, we see 4 good suit leak checks.
Green copy, good suit leak check.
And as you heard in that communications, 4 good leak checks performed on the suits, being worn by McClain, Nichole, Ayers, Takuya, Onishi, and Kirill Peskov, with their crew members who soon will be departing the International Space Station, all buttoned up now, conducting final pre-departure preparations. We will point towards our next broadcast that is coming up at 4:45 p.m. Central Time, 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time, when we here in Houston will be joined by our colleagues in Hawthorne, California at SpaceX Mission Control for the undocking of Endurance from the International Space Station and the beginning of the trip home for the Crew-10 crew members. So again, the hatch is closed, the suits have been verified to be airtight, and the stage is set for the departure of Crew-10 from the International Space Station about 1 hour and 34 minutes from now. With that, we'll sign off this broadcast, and we'll be back with you in about 1 hour and 15 minutes for the undocking of Endurance from the International Space Station. In the meantime, this is Mission Control Houston.
density is not going to make it into the atmosphere and intact onto the Earth. Okay, so you would have an airburst, for example. Whereas if you have a really dense object like this iron meteorite, it'll punch right through the atmosphere, even if
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery, roger, go for deploy. Thanks, Taylor, and to everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch. Roger, nice to be in orbit. We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
It's Friday, August 8th, and we're joining you today from SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. We're following along with the Dragon Endurance spacecraft as we await Crew-10's departure from the International Space Station. Right now, we're expecting that process to begin shortly after 3 p.m. Pacific and 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm Ronnie Foreman, a senior sales manager here at SpaceX.
And I'm Anna Schneider with NASA Communications. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here, Anna. And of course, thank you for everyone tuning in to watch us live with our coverage today of Dragon completing its 10th crew rotation mission to the space station through NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Crew-11 arrived on station on Saturday, August 2nd at 2:27 a.m. Eastern, and they will be taking over for Crew-10, who are now headed home.
That's right, Ronnie. Crew-11 launched just last week on Friday, August 1st at 8:43 a.m. Pacific, 11:43 a.m. Eastern from Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, with NASA astronauts Commander Zena Cardman and pilot Mike Fink, JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut and mission specialist Kimiya Yui, along with Roscosmos cosmonaut and mission specialist Oleg Platonov. The crew has since spent a few days in space, with those days docked to the space station being a handover period where they learn to live and work on station from the departing crew. Now, the returning Crew-10 members today are NASA astronauts McClain and Nichole Ayers, along with JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov.
Right now, the crew is currently suited inside Dragon, and both the Dragon and station hatches are sealed in preparation for departure. Once Dragon departs the station, the crew's flight home is expected to last around 17.5 hours. Shortly after separation, Dragon will use its Draco thrusters to carefully move away from the station and complete a phasing burn that will prepare it to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Following phasing, Dragon will complete deorbit, re-entry, and splashdown. During our deorbit sequence, several events will occur, including trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and finally, splashdown. And of course, like all of our mission with Crew-10 so far, Mission Control, SpaceX, and of course on the big loop connected to Houston, we'll be monitoring their progress all the way. You've got a great view of Mission Control at SpaceX here, but we'll hear call-outs from Mission Control in Houston here shortly. And of course, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of California tomorrow, August 9th, at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern, where it will be picked up by a SpaceX recovery vessel, and our recovery teams will help to egress or exit the crew from Dragon.
Now, currently on board the space station is the Expedition 73 crew, led by the current space station commander, Sergei Ryzhikov of Roscosmos. Just a few days ago, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi handed over command of the space station to Ryzhikov ahead of his departure today, alongside his Crew-10 crewmates. Now, also on board space station is NASA astronaut Johnny Kim, as well as Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexei Zubrytsky, and of course the recently arrived Crew-11 astronauts. Now, just like its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Johnny Kim has helped the crew members prepare for today's departure and will be watching from the cupola, but the prime departure monitoring role falls on McClain from inside Dragon. Mission Control in both Houston and Hawthorne will back them up as we step through today's undocking. And speaking of Mission Control in Houston, let's check in with NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius at the Johnson Space Center in Houston to talk a bit about how the station crew have been preparing to send today's crew home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs from station. Rob?
Thanks very much, Anna. Here in Mission Control in Houston, the team on console is led by Flight Director Allison Bollinger. She's joined by spacecraft communicator Tess Caswell, who will be talking directly to the crew through that big loop you described, all the way through the exit from the so-called approach ellipsoid, which is the racetrack boundary, after which joint operations will conclude between Houston and your Mission Control there in Hawthorne, California. A short time ago, Bollinger polled her team of flight controllers here and received a go for undocking. Now, the undocking time has been adjusted ever so slightly by just a few minutes to the right. the undocking command that will initiate the retraction of the umbilical between Dragon and the station that has been providing telemetry and electricity to the Dragon Endurance will be retracted. That will then initiate the opening of 2 sets of hooks, 6 hooks per set, that will physically separate Dragon from the International Space Station and conclude its 5-month stay on board the orbital outpost. Once that separation occurs, and it is now targeted, by the way, for 5:15 p.m. Central Time, 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time, that would mark physical separation. Dragon will move away from the forward port of Harmony to a point about 400 meters in front of the station. Then through a series of departure burns, we'll move to a point above the station, behind the station, and then we'll phase away below the station for a 17.5-hour transit to its deorbit burn and splashdown off the coast of California on Saturday morning, as you described. The crew statistics for Crew-10, very impressive. They will have spent 148 days in space at the time of their splashdown on Saturday morning, 146 days of which were locked in and working with the Expedition 73 crew aboard the International Space Station. McClain, Ayers, Peskov, and Onishi will have completed 2,368 orbits of the Earth, a mission spanning 62.7 million miles. And McClain will have totaled 352 days in space during her 2 missions once she returns to Earth on Saturday. Ayers and Peskov, both first-time flyers, will have accrued 148 days, and Takuya Onishi, completing his 2nd flight into space, will have totaled 263 days on his 2 missions. So everything is all set for the departure of Crew-10 from the station. By the way, the delay, the wave-offs, if you will, because of weather over the past couple of days, concluded with a weather briefing this morning, and SpaceX and NASA were both go for undocking with the conditions, lighter winds, and even though there are some low clouds expected at the time of final descent for Endurance to its splashdown point off the coast of California, those conditions are well within limits to allow the undocking today and the return to Earth tomorrow for Crew-10. With that, we'll hand it back to Ronnie and Anna in Hawthorne and stand by for physical separation.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you for those updates. Of course, the team will continue to watch and monitor the weather all the way through splashdown and as they make their way through those phasing burns and onto deorbit tomorrow morning. And we heard just a minute ago that the teams were doing their final go, no-go poll. Again, they do all of these checkpoints and sequence all the way up through undocking to make sure all the teams are ready to go. And should for any point they have to wave off last minute for weather or whatever it may be, there's of course opportunities down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And because it does take us time to get back from the International Space Station to our splashdown location, we're monitoring weather not just at the time of separation, but trying to do that forecast ahead to make sure that we're going to have an easy splashdown for our crew, who are coming back from, almost 150 days in space. I want to make sure it's a warm welcome back here in California.
Yeah. And now let's take a moment to go ahead and meet the crew that we're bringing home today before they depart the International Space Station. So first up, we have NASA astronaut Anne McClain, who is your Crew-10 commander. Born and raised in Spokane, Washington, NASA selected McClain as an astronaut candidate in 2013. Crew-10 is her 2nd space flight after launching aboard the Soyuz MS-11 in 2018 and serving as a flight engineer on the International Space Station for expeditions 58 and 59. At the conclusion of this mission, as Rob mentioned, she will have spent 352 total days in space across her 2 missions, completing a total of 3 spacewalks for 18 hours and 52 minutes outside the orbiting laboratory. McClain is a West Point graduate and a colonel in the U.S. Army. She's a highly decorated Master Army aviator and has more than 2,000 flight hours in 20 different aircraft. McClain is also an avid rugby player and a former member of the USA Rugby Women's National Team, and she currently lives in Houston, Texas.
The pilot for Crew-10 is NASA astronaut Nichole Ayers. Crew-10 is her first spaceflight, a major in the U.S. Air Force and the first member of NASA's 2021 astronaut class named to a crew. Following this mission, Ayers will have logged 148 days in space, completing 1 spacewalk for a total of 5 hours and 44 minutes outside the space station. Ayers is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Final reconfigurations for undock are complete and nominal. Ground is go for undocking. Undock sequence start time is 22:10.
SpaceX Dragon, copy, go for undock. Crew has visors down.
SpaceX copies, visors down.
We heard a little bit of chatter there between mission control here in SpaceX communicating with our crew on board. And we've got confirmation that visors are down. What we're doing right now is getting the crew into their fully suited up, ready to depart configuration, because we want to make sure that for all of these dynamic phases of flight, we have them safely inside their spacesuits. So with that, let's take it back to our crew. We were just discussing mission pilot Nichole Ayers, who is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. She has served as an instructor pilot and mission commander in the T-38 Adair and F-22 Raptor, leading multinational and multi-service missions worldwide. She has more than 1,400 total flight hours, including more than 200 hours in combat. Ayers has a twin and was born in San Diego, California.
And this is also the second mission to the space station for JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, astronaut Takuya Onishi, after launching aboard the Soyuz MS-01 mission in 2016 and spending 113 days in space as a flight engineer for expeditions 48 and 49. Following Crew-10, Onishi will have logged a total of 263 days in space. Onishi received a Bachelor of Engineering in Aeronautical and Space Engineering from the University of Tokyo and soon embarked on a career in aviation with All Nippon Airways in Tokyo. He was selected as an astronaut candidate by JAXA in 2009, and during his stay on the space station, he became the first Japanese astronaut to capture the Cygnus spacecraft in space. Now, when he's not training, Onishi enjoys flying, playing the saxophone, movies, and hiking.
And rounding out our crew, this is mission specialist and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. Like Ayers, the Crew-10 mission is also his first trip to the International Space Station. After the conclusion of this mission, he will have spent 148 days in space. Before his selection as a cosmonaut in 2018, he was a co-pilot on the Boeing 757 and 767 aircraft for airlines Nordwind and ECAR. Assigned as a test cosmonaut in 2020, he has additional experience in skydiving, zero-gravity training, scuba diving, and wilderness survival.
And it's a great crew that we are bringing home. Of course, now on your screen, you can actually see a look inside Dragon that's looking over the shoulders of the pilots and commanders. So Nichole Ayers and McClain there in the center. They're all suited up and getting ready for today's departure. Again, we're just over about 10 minutes away from the undock command, and once that undock command is sent, it takes about 5 minutes to then have that physical separation from station, which will then mark the conclusion of their stay aboard the International Space Station as they make their way home to Earth. And just a few minutes ago, when we were introducing you to the crew, we heard some of those comms. Again, those comms were on what is known as the big loop. So that's that integrated communications loop that includes the team here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, as well as the Mission Control team in Houston, along with the space station crew with Expedition 73 aboard and the Dragon Crew-10, who is departing today. It basically allows all of those teams to be working in tandem and talking on one integrated communications loop. So throughout today's departure activities, that is where we will be hearing those communications between the ground and the station and crew aboard. And right now, the International Space Station and Dragon are orbiting about 260 statute miles above Earth, crossing the southern Indian Ocean. And we also did just hear a few minutes ago that the teams had pulled go to proceed with today's undocking and departure activities. So again, we are just standing by for that undocking command here in just about 10 minutes.
So again, right now, if you are just joining us, we are standing by for Crew-10's departure from the International Space Station. And the view on your screen right now is looking over the shoulder of the pilot and commander for today's mission, up at the 3 touchscreen displays inside the Dragon spacecraft. Our crew is going to use these touchscreens to monitor their progress as they move away from station, even though the maneuver itself is fully autonomous.
And as we mentioned a few minutes ago, the Joint Flight Control teams did pull go to proceed with today's undocking and departure. And now that the Joint Flight Control teams are go for undock, we are just awaiting that undock sequence to actually begin. Again, the undock command is scheduled to be sent in about 9 minutes at 3:10 p.m. Pacific, 6:10 p.m. Eastern. Once that command is sent, it will take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station, which has been its home for the last 5 months.
At the planned undock time, SpaceX Mission Control will command the undock sequence start, which begins the automatic undocking process we were just talking about. The first step is for the umbilicals to retract. These umbilicals connect Dragon systems to the space station while docked, transferring power, telemetry, and commands between the two vehicles throughout Dragon's stay. Once that's complete, Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station by releasing the 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases, which Rob was telling us about while he was with us a couple minutes ago. All that combined takes roughly 4.5 minutes. And then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and begin to move itself further and further away using the Draco thrusters on board.
And Dragon's initial departure from station is a little bit different from other docked vehicles like the Soyuz that rely on springs to push them away from the docking port. Dragon will actually execute 2 short thruster firings called undock burns, and that is what physically separates Dragon from the International Space Station. Those thruster firings use a combination of the 12 Draco engines around the base of the spacecraft, with the first breaking any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and then the second slowly backing the spacecraft away from the station's Harmony module. And again, Dragon is currently docked to the forward-facing port on the Harmony module. Crew-11 docked last Saturday to the space-facing port. And following that physical separation, which we are expecting at about 3:15 p.m. Pacific, 6:15 p.m. Eastern, we will have Depart Burn 0, which is the first of 4 departure burns to begin moving Dragon further away from the space station. That initial departure burn, Depart Burn 0, will then be followed by the second departure burn about 5 minutes later, and that will help move the spacecraft beyond the keep-out sphere. The keep-out sphere is an invisible 200-meter line centered on the space station, and it is one of several safety zones set up to govern spacecraft arriving and departing from the International Space Station. Before moving into the keep-out sphere, spacecraft have to be configured where they would not cross the imaginary boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if the spacecraft lost all maneuvering. And then after that, about 13 minutes later, today that would be around 3:34 p.m. Pacific, 6:34 p.m. Eastern, Dragon will then exit what is known as the approach ellipsoid. Again, it's another imaginary shape, this time a 3-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in the same family as the keep-out sphere. One of the key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory, which means the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours, even if it lost all maneuvering. Again, we're expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin in about 6 minutes. And then after that happens, it'll be about 5 more minutes before we have physical separation of Dragon carrying Crew-10 away from the International Space Station to conclude their mission.
Just had a shot a second there of our crew on board working through some final checklists, preparing for that undocking sequence start.
And all throughout today, there have been a lot of procedures that they've had to work through. Before we started today's broadcast, the crew had to work through hatch close procedures, and then they got suited up and completed some leak checks. They also depressurized the vestibule, which is the area in between the Dragon hatch and the space station hatch, which prior to Crew-10's docking back in March would have been exposed to the vacuum of space. Now, of course, after they undocked today, that area will then be re-exposed to that vacuum of space. And during their mission, they conducted quite a bit of science. They contributed to more than 200 different microgravity science and research experiments during their time aboard the International Space Station. And the International Space Station will actually mark a very important milestone this year. It'll be the 25th year of continuous human presence aboard the orbiting laboratory. And during that time, over 4,000 different experiments have been conducted in that unique environment.
I'm always struck by when we do these webcasts talking about the expedition numbers of our crew, how many different astronauts have been on board station. And of course, today is the completion of the 10th crew rotational mission as part of the commercial crew program. And of course, our 10th Crew Dragon mission to the International Space Station as well. For those of you just joining us or have not watched an undocking before, in the lower left-hand corner of your screen now, you have the range and rate available so that you can help monitor along from home, just like we're monitoring here from Mission Control. The range tells you about how far away from the station we are, and the rate is the speed at which that distance is changing. So we're looking for both to increase as we move through these carefully planned maneuvers as we go through our separation, phasing burns, and ultimately head towards splashdown.
And what's really interesting about undockings and dockings is that both vehicles are actually traveling at about 17,000 miles per hour. So if you think about it, the relative rate seems small and it seems like they're going so slow when you're watching it on TV, but it's really, they're going very fast, and they orbit about 260 statute miles above Earth. So as Dragon makes its way back to Earth, it of course has to lower down so that it can re-enter Earth's atmosphere, again targeting that splashdown early tomorrow morning around 8:33 a.m. Pacific. And we're now just about 3 minutes away from that undock command, which will be sent to Dragon from the ground, and that will then command the umbilicals to retract, and those umbilicals provide power between Dragon and the space station, and those were initially attached when Dragon docked to the International Space Station back in March. So then after the umbilicals retract, then we will have those hooks begin to drive open, and that will happen in 2 sets of 6. And then once that happens, Dragon will conduct those 2 short thruster firings to physically separate it from station.
And as you mentioned, this is the same Dragon that docked with Crew-10 back in March. Part of our operating procedure is such that the Dragon spacecraft that launches the astronauts is exactly the same one that brings them back home. So while our Crew-10 astronauts have been aboard the International Space Station, Dragon has been docked to the ISS as well. And we're using them in that docked configuration, effectively as one vehicle. Their spacesuits are stored inside of Dragon, as are some of those experiments that you were talking about.
And of course, they had to repack some of those scientific experiments to make their way back to Earth. Again, we're about 1 minute away from that undock command. So as we continue to stand by, let's go ahead and check back in with Rob Navius at NASA's Mission Control in Houston.
Thanks very much, you guys out in Hawthorne. Here in Mission Control in Houston, all flight controllers are set for the beginning of the end of the Crew-10 mission and the journey home that will span about 17.5 hours from the time of physical separation to the time of tomorrow's splashdown off the coast of California. We're about 20 seconds away from the issuance of the undocking command from Hawthorne. We'll stand by for confirmation of that. All of Dragon Endurance's systems are in excellent shape, as are the systems aboard the International Space Station, as we stand by about 10 seconds from now for the issuance of that undocking command. And execution of the command now has been issued. The first step on the road to separation will be the retraction of the umbilical that you just heard a moment ago. And McClain, the commander of Endurance, acknowledging the issuance of the undocking command, the umbilical being retracted. Once again, this means that Endurance will be on its own in terms of internal power and telemetry, no longer interconnected to the International Space Station.
Umbilical demate complete and nominal.
And the first set of hooks now traveling. 2 gangs of hooks, 6 hooks apiece, will open in sequential fashion. Hook set number 1 followed quickly by hook set number 2. And then the next step will be that 1.5 second pulse of the Draco thrusters, the undocking burn that will create the physical separation between Dragon and the International Space Station. The Expedition 73 crew, who will be left on board the station to continue the unbroken presence of humans on board the orbital outpost led by Roscosmos cosmonaut Sergei Ryzhikov. He's the new ISS commander, joined by Alexei Zabritsky, Oleg Platonov, Johnny Kim, Zena Cardman, Mike Fink, and Kimia Yui. Takes about 5 minutes from the issuance of the undocking command until physical separation, so we'll be standing by to annotate the exact time and location over the Earth at the point of physical separation that will begin the trip home for Dragon Endurance. We're currently in an orbital nighttime pass. We should be moving into a daylight pass over the southwestern Pacific Ocean a short time from now. The International Space Station traveling from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. And the first set of hooks now open, now working on the second set.
First set of hooks, open and nominal.
Second set of hooks now driving. All quiet here in the mission control room here in Houston, the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Once the undocking is complete and Endurance is outside of the approach ellipsoid, which will end joint operations between us and the SpaceX team in Hawthorne, the Expedition 73 crew will move into a pre-sleep period and a lengthy sleep period overnight and an off-duty day tomorrow. The second set of hooks now open, standing by for undock burn number 1. Dragon and the International Space Station flying into an orbital sunrise. All hooks confirmed to be open.
All hooks now open and nominal. Dragon separation.
And we have undocking. Physical separation confirmed at 5:15 p.m. Central Time, 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time, as the station and Dragon flew 260 miles over Jakarta, Indonesia. And undock burn number 2 has been completed. And depart 0 burn now underway. You can see those Draco thrusters doing their thing. opening up an increasingly quicker separation rate between Dragon and the station. Depart 0 burn complete.
Depart burn 0 complete, performance nominal.
Visiting vehicle officer here reports good trajectory as Dragon Endurance leaves the International Space Station from which it docked 146 days ago. We're about 4 minutes away from depart burn number 1. That'll be a 22-second firing of the Draco thrusters to increase the acceleration of Endurance away from the international outpost. Again, physical separation, undocking occurring at 5:15 p.m. Central, 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time, as Dragon and the station flew 260 miles over Jakarta, Indonesia. And again, we will remain in integrated operations with Hawthorne, California and SpaceX Mission Control until the time that Endurance has exited the approach ellipsoid, which is that 2 by 2 by 4 kilometer invisible boundary, basically a racetrack shaped oval type boundary that represents the vicinity of the neighborhood of the International Space Station within which integrated operations are conducted. McClain, Nichole, Ayers, Takuya, Onishi, and Kirill, Peskov beginning the journey home that will culminate with their parachute-assisted splashdown off the coast of California Saturday morning. The track of Dragon in the station will carry it a moment from now across Malaysia and then just south of Manila, the capital of the Philippines. Everything has gone by the book. All of the pre-departure preparations went per the timeline. The undocking was deliberately pushed back a few minutes to gain better visibility, communications, and camera views of Dragon as it departed the International Space Station. We still are headed for a splashdown on Saturday morning at 10:33 a.m. Central Time, 8:33 a.m. Pacific Time off the coast of California. This will be the fourth time that SpaceX will have executed a splashdown and recovery off the coast of California, following in the footsteps of Fram-2, the 32nd commercial resupply mission, a cargo Dragon, and then most recently Axiom 4, but this will be the first time that a California splashdown will have been executed as part of the commercial crew program. We're about 25 seconds away from departure burn number 1. This is a 22-second firing with a delta velocity change of 0.6 of a meter per second to further increase Endurance's opening rate from the International Space Station. That will be followed seconds later by its exit from the keep-out sphere, the first of these two boundaries within which integrated operations are occurring, and depart burn 1 underway.
Depart burn 1 complete. You are go to DOF suits per procedure 4.012. Reminder, ground will be deactivating the big loop following exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Dragon now maneuvering.
Crew-10 copies go to DOF suits. To the ISS crew, Expedition 73 Bravo, it is an absolute privilege to cross paths with you. Good luck in the rest of the mission. Godspeed.
Anne, Vapor, Talk, and Kirill, thank you for your wishes. We wish you fair winds and following seas. It's been an honor for all of us around the world to support you as you lived and worked on the International Space Station. We cannot wait to welcome you home to the blue skies of Earth.
Endurance Commander Anne McClain exchanging words with
Crew-10 station on a big loop. Fair winds and following seas. It was a huge honor to work with you all. We're going to miss you, and we can't wait to see you back on Earth.
Likewise, Johnny and the rest of the crew, have a great mission.
Again, Endurance Commander Anne McClain wishing all the best and a big vote of thanks.
Dragon and Station, Houston on the big loop. Dragon has exited the keep-out sphere.
And as you heard, Endurance is now outside of the keep-out sphere. The next milestone will be coming up about 11 minutes from now, and that will be the approach ellipsoid exit to conclude joint integrated operations. And you heard those words from spacecraft communicator Tess Caswell here in Mission Control, as well as NASA astronaut Johnny Kim, who remains on board the station until early December as part of the Expedition 73 crew. So with Endurance well on the way on the first leg of its journey home that will culminate with its splashdown off the coast of California Saturday morning, we're about to conclude joint integrated operations with Hawthorne here in Mission Control in Houston. And so with that, we will toss it back to Ronnie and Anna at SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California.
Thanks, Rob. So as you mentioned, we are now waiting for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid, or AE, which is another imaginary shape, this time a three-dimensional ellipsoid, measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. As an easy visual, that's roughly like the shape of a football or maybe a rugby ball, which is appropriate given that our commander today is a rugby player. And it's in exactly the same family as the keep-out sphere for operational purposes. One of the key differences with the AE, though, is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe, free drift trajectory. That means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours. Again, even if it lost all maneuvering for that call-out once we hear confirmation that Dragon is outside of the AE.
And then after the Dragon spacecraft crosses the approach ellipsoid, as Rob mentioned, joint operations will end and the responsibility for the spacecraft will be handed back to the SpaceX flight control team here in Hawthorne, California. Again, everything continuing to look good with today's departure for Crew-10 from the International Space Station. Dragon is now just under 400 meters away from the International Space Station. And to recap, the hatches between the International Space Station and Dragon were closed earlier today around 1:04 p.m. Pacific, 4:04 p.m. Eastern Time. And since then, the crew has settled in to begin their 17-and-a-half-hour journey back to Earth. The joint NASA and SpaceX teams then pulled go to proceed with undock. Undock was delayed by
SpaceX third on the ComSec on the handheld microphone.
I have you loud and clear on the cabin mic on the big loop.
Okay, we can hear you loud and clear.
And those comms there were with the core or the crew.
SpaceX Dragon for ComCheck on Dragon to ground.
I've got you loud and clear on Dragon to ground. How me?
Okay, same. Thanks.
Again, those comms there were between JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and the core or the crew operations resource engineer in SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, just behind us. And again, to recap a little bit, the undock command was sent around 3:10 p.m. Pacific, 6:10 p.m. Eastern. This was then followed by umbilical retraction and hooks opening, with that physical separation then taking place at 3:15 p.m. Pacific, 6:15 p.m. Eastern, as the space station and Dragon were traveling 260 statute miles over Indonesia. Dragon has since completed 2 of 4 departure burns and exited the keep out sphere. Again, that is that 200-meter invisible boundary around the International Space Station. We are now about 5 or so minutes away from Dragon crossing the approach ellipsoid to set the spacecraft and Crew-10 up for their path back to Earth. Dragon is now about 500 meters away from the International Space Station. Again, that range and range rate continuing to increase as it continues on its departure. Again, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of California tomorrow, August 9th at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern, marking the completion of their 5-month science and research mission.
Of course, if you're following along, you've noticed that in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, we have updated the telemetry that we're sharing with you, now tracking the speed and altitude of the Dragon spacecraft. There we've got a shot on board on your screen right now of onboard the Dragon spacecraft. Our crew inside has been given the go to doff their suits. Generally speaking, we always have the astronauts in their suits when we're in dynamic phases of flight. That's because the spacesuits are effectively an extension of the spacecraft. If we needed to for any reason, the spacesuit is designed to keep the astronauts safe. Now that we've cleared that dynamic phase, it's time for them to take those suits off, get a little bit more comfortable for their 17.5-hour journey home.
And then they will put those suits back on just before they begin that deorbit phase. So they'll have a little bit of time to get some sleep, get a meal, and really settle in, since it is a 17.5-hour journey. Again, we are about 5 or 6 minutes away from exiting the approach ellipsoid. Again, that is that 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 4 kilometer invisible boundary that we are waiting for Dragon to exit. And once that happens, Crew-10 will no longer be in integrated operations, and you did hear them setting up some of the communications directly between SpaceX Mission Control and Hawthorne and Crew-10 aboard Dragon, so it'll be a direct communication with them without the station crew in the loop there. And right now, Dragon is about 600 meters away from the International Space Station, as the International Space Station travels about 260 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean off of the coast of Japan. And the International Space Station does go through an orbit every 90 minutes or so. And when we had that undocking, you could see the sunrise. So they were coming into an orbital daytime during that undocking, and that is actually why the undock was delayed by about 10 minutes, just to allow better comms and to get those great views from the International Space Station.
As you mentioned, because we're orbiting the Earth roughly every 90 minutes, our Crew-10 astronauts and those astronauts still on board the International Space Station are seeing about 15 sunrises and sunsets every day.
And there on your screen, you're seeing a live look inside the SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne. Again, the Dragon and the International Space Station do go in and out of signal as they transition satellites, which is known as a loss of signal. And then once they reacquire signal, that'd be acquisition of signal. And there you can see a live look of Dragon from the International Space Station. And those cameras on the International Space Station are actually controlled by a flight controller and mission control in Houston known as Cronus. So they actually manually work to follow Dragon during its approach as well as during its arrival and docking, which happened back in March.
You can already see, as we get this last glimpse of Dragon as it departs the station, how much smaller Dragon is from these cameras on board the International Space Station. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but even though the rate of separation between these two vehicles right now is smooth and steady, which is exactly how we want it to be, they are both traveling about 17,000 miles per hour, which is a just tremendous amount of speed and energy that we have moving between these vehicles. So it's important that every phase of this process is planned, carefully executed, so that we understand what's coming next.
And right now, Dragon is about 750 meters away from the International Space Station. So again, continuing to increase that gap between the space station and Dragon as we continue to await confirmation of approach ellipsoid exit. And there on your screen, you can actually see a map which depicts where Dragon and the International Space Station are flying. Again, they're flying over the Pacific Ocean.
We have kind of the zoomed in view here available on your screen right now, but you can always see our position relative to the Earth in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can see that little light where we have Dragon over, again, the Pacific Ocean. And then right next to that, you can see a map of Dragon's Draco thrusters. Each of those little white puffs that you see are small adjustments that the Draco thrusters on board Dragon are making to control its position. In spacecraft, we generally refer to that as the spacecraft's attitude, but we are talking about the relative 3D orientation of the spacecraft.
And right now that range rate is about 1.1 meters per second, so slowly starting to increase that speed as Dragon continues to make its departure from the International Space Station. As we stand by for confirmation of approach ellipsoid exit, the Dragon spacecraft is currently over 830 meters away from the space station. Again, this is following its undocking and physical separation about 18 minutes ago at 3:15 p.m. Pacific, 6:15 p.m. Eastern. And following the physical separation, which required those two short undock burns, we did have 2 departure burns, and that was the first 2 of 4 departure burns. The depart burn 2, which is the 3rd departure burn, will be coming up about 30 minutes or so after approach ellipsoid exit, and then that will be followed by the final departure burn, depart burn 3, before they get into those phasing burns and then set Dragon up for its deorbit burn early tomorrow morning ahead of splashdown off the coast of California.
We talked about this a little bit earlier on too, but following that phasing burn, Dragon is going to complete deorbit reentry and splashdown. During our deorbit sequence, several events are going to occur, including trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of our drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown.
And then after splashdown, there's still quite a few activities that have to take place to actually hoist Dragon up onto the recovery vessel. The recovery vessel for this is the Shannon. And so the recovery team is getting staged out there. The boat is on its way to the splashdown location, and then there will be a set of helicopters that take the recovery team out to the boats, and they also have 2 fast boats, and so those fast boats will be the first ones out to the splashdown location following that 8:33 a.m. Pacific splashdown tomorrow morning, and they do some initial checks to ensure the safety of the spacecraft before they begin safing it to prepare to lift it up onto the recovery vessel.
And of course, once Dragon is on board our recovery vessel, we're going to help the crew egress or exit Dragon. And then we'll also do some quick recovery of the time-sensitive scientific experiments and cargo on board, sending those to different research labs
Dragon,
all around.
SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. Configure COM for Dragon aground in preparation for disabling the big loop.
SpaceX Dragon copies. Thank you.
And so we did hear confirmation just now that Dragon has exited the approach ellipsoid. Again, that is that invisible boundary measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, and the same family as the keep out sphere. And vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour state-free trajectory, which means the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours, again, even if it lost all maneuvering. So now that Dragon and Crew-10 are well on their way back to Earth to conclude their 5-month science and research mission aboard the International Space Station, let's check in one more time with Rob Navius and Mission Control Houston.
Thanks, you guys. You mentioned some of the critical activities that are coming up. The most critical activity tomorrow for the Endurance crew will be that deorbit burn that you mentioned. That will be a 17.5-minute retrograde firing of the Draco thrusters, basically a braking maneuver to slow Endurance down by 115.4 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit for its high-speed entry back into the Earth's atmosphere. The direction of travel will keep the heat shield in the direction of travel to repel the temperatures that will build up to some 2,500 degrees around the spacecraft and its 4 occupants. Here in Mission Control, the team led by Flight Director Allison Bollinger is now winding down its activities. The crew on board the station moving into a pre-sleep period. They will wake up in time, however, to watch all of the critical activities that will be uplinked to them for the return of Endurance and its parachute-assisted splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. So with that, we'll wrap it up here in Mission Control in Houston and turn it back to you guys in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Rob. As you mentioned with that, Crew-10 has officially departed the International Space Station. It's going to take them about 17.5 hours until they make their way back to Earth. The crew is currently doffing or removing their spacesuits to settle in for that ride home. As we've mentioned previously, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of California at 8:33 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow, Saturday, August 9th, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by a SpaceX recovery vessel. As they rest up, our teams here will continue to keep an eye on the weather to ensure a safe return for Dragon and our Crew-10 astronauts.
And although our undocking coverage is concluding for today, you can continue to follow along with Crew-10's journey back to Earth by listening to real-time mission audio, the same operational communication used by flight controllers on the ground on NASA's YouTube channel. Meanwhile, we will rejoin for live visual coverage starting a little more than 1 hour prior to splashdown at 7:15 a.m. Pacific, 10:15 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. And as always, you can find mission updates on X, at NASA, at SpaceX, and online at NASA.gov. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon, and our Crew-10 astronauts back on Earth very soon.